Let's unpack this. We've got a stack of material right here, all about the absolute essentials you need to communicate effectively in a professional setting.
Yeah.
Think of it as your shortcut, sort of, to navigating the modern workplace with confidence.
Right.
Our mission in this deep dive is to pull out the absolute most important knowledge from these sources so you can quickly grasp the core concepts and, feel instantly more informed about what makes communication work and maybe what makes it fail at work.
Exactly. And this deep dive is specifically for you, the listener, who wants that solid understanding without getting bogged down in every single detail.
Mm-hmm.
We'll journey through the foundational building blocks of communication, then look at mastering how you interact with others, both when speaking and when writing.
Okay.
And we'll even touch on the tricky stuff like handling conflict and working in groups.
We're your guides through this material, pointing out the surprising insights and the really practical takeaways. So as we get ready to jump in, what's something that immediately stands out about the approach this material takes?
Well, what's really valuable, I think, is how grounded it is. It's not just theoretical talk about communication. It ties everything back to practical needs and, well, real-world scenarios you encounter every day at work.
Right, the stuff you actually face.
Yeah. It's about understanding why communication matters and how to make it work for you.
All right, let's dive into what these sources lay out. They kick things off by setting the scene, highlighting that the modern workplace isn't just about technical skills anymore.
That's a key starting point, yeah. This material introduces the idea of essential employability skills,
Okay.
the kinds of skills that make you effective and valuable no matter your specific job title.
And out of a broader list, this body of work really zeroes in on 4 vital categories that are foundational: communication, technology, productivity, and self and social awareness.
Mhm.
Everything we'll discuss today touches on one or more of these.
So think of this deep dive as distilling the absolute core learning points from this material related to those crucial workplace skills. It gives you the essence.
Where better to start than the very beginning? The sources call this the basics, and it involves breaking down communication into its fundamental parts.
Right. They identify several essential elements that are always in play. You have the source, who initiates the message, and the receiver, who interprets it.
Very.
The message is the content you're trying to convey.
Yeah.
And the channel is the medium you use face-to-face, email, a phone call, and so on.
Then there's the setting, split into the environment, the physical space, and the context, which includes the expectations shaped by the situation and purpose. But communication doesn't happen in a vacuum, right?
Absolutely not. 2 elements are particularly crucial for understanding where things go wrong sometimes. There's interference, often called noise,
Okay.
which is anything that disrupts the message. It could be literal background noise,
Right.
or it could be internal, like someone being distracted.
That makes so much sense. And then there's feedback, the response from the receiver. This is where you find out if your message actually landed the way you intended, or if, maybe, you need to try again.
Exactly. The example the source uses here is really helpful. Imagine a sales manager, the source, on a conference call, the channel,
Okay.
telling sales reps, the receivers, to push sales during the World Series, the message. The meeting room is the environment. The business meeting during a major sporting event is the context.
Right.
If the reps are silent, that lack of replies is the feedback, showing the message didn't prompt the desired response.
And the interference example is so relatable, trying to include specific sales figures in a report, but getting distracted thinking about how to respond to the boss's initial request.
Yeah.
Completely missing the instruction about previous year's data. That internal distraction is the interference that leads to an incomplete report. It shows how subtle these elements can be.
It really does highlight the complexity. And to better understand how these pieces interact, the sources introduce a couple of models.
First, the transactional model. This views communication not just as a one-way street, but as a dynamic exchange where people are sending and receiving messages simultaneously.
Right. It's like we're constantly influencing each other rather than just taking turns. Building on that is the constructivist model, which focuses on how we actually arrive at shared meaning.
So it's not enough to just send a message. You have to work with the receiver to build common ground and negotiated meaning.
Precisely.
The classic example is the word Coke in Atlanta. For someone there, Coke might mean any soft drink. If you're visiting and ask for a Coke expecting a specific brand, and they ask which kind, You realize your meaning isn't their meaning.
Exactly. You need yourself and social awareness in that moment to recognize the different meaning and figure out what they actually need you to say to get what you want.
Ah, okay.
It's a great illustration that meaning isn't fixed. It's something we actively construct together.
That makes total sense. And this construction of meaning happens across different situations, what the sources refer to as different contexts of communication.
Right. We communicate with ourselves, intrapersonal, that internal dialogue.
Mhm.
We communicate with one or two other people, interpersonal,
Hmm.
which can range from, casual chat to a formal meeting.
Then there's group communication, usually 3 to 8 people. The sources note that trying to maintain focused group discussion gets much harder with larger numbers.
Definitely.
Here, understanding your audience segments their demographics, their knowledge becomes really important for tailoring your message.
Yes, knowing who you're talking to helps you speak their language, quite literally. Beyond that, there's public communication, one person addressing a larger audience, like giving a presentation.
And finally, mass communication, sending a single message to a huge audience, like an ad campaign or a company-wide broadcast.
Right, like those mass mailings they mentioned that often feel impersonal, almost like junk mail, because they aren't tailored to individual context.
Yeah, exactly. So understanding context is deeply tied to self and social awareness.
Absolutely. Now, taking those basics and applying them to actual speaking situations, the material offers some direct advice for improving your verbal communication.
It highlights several key principles. First, organization. Structure your thoughts, narrow your focus, decide what's essential to include, act as a gatekeeper for information.
Then clarity. Choose words your audience understands. Avoid jargon unless you're sure everyone knows it.
You okay?
Make sure your delivery is clear. Speak audibly at a reasonable pace with an engaging tone. Technology should help, not hinder, clarity. So check that, Mike.
Good point. And conciseness. Get to the point. The sources emphasize that rambling or including unnecessary details, even if you're an expert, shows a lack of respect for your audience's time.
Oh, definitely.
We've all been in that meeting where the speaker says, in conclusion, and then goes on for another 10 minutes.
Right. Sensitivity to time constraints is crucial. Tone is also vital. Show passion and enthusiasm, but always maintain respect. Losing your temper, for instance, is a quick way to lose credibility and show disrespect.
Very true. And finally, checking for understanding. Look for that feedback. Scan the audience, listen for questions, make sure your message is being received. The sources also bring up egalitarian communication using language that includes everyone in the group, whether it's a memo to all nurses or a speech to all adjusters, avoiding language that assumes gender or role within that group.
It's about being inclusive in your language choices. And beyond the words themselves, how we deliver them nonverbally is just as powerful, maybe even more so.
Oh, nonverbal communication is endlessly fascinating because it's so rich and often subconscious. The sources remind us it's both universal, a smile often means happiness, but also contextual.
Right.
When and why you smile varies. It can be intentional or unintentional, and unlike a verbal misstep you can correct, a nonverbal signal is seen or heard and can't really be taken aback.
Exactly. It conveys messages through gestures, expressions, posture, even silence. And it doesn't always match what you're saying verbally, and can sometimes be used to mask true feelings.
The material lists 6 key ways nonverbal communication functions. Complimenting adds to verbal. Repeating, gesture matches words.
Okay.
Regulating controls conversation flow. Replacing gesture instead of words. Masking, hiding true feelings with a different nonverbal cue. And contradicting, nonverbal opposing verbal.
When we look closer at the types, kinesics is the study of body movements. This includes illustrators that visually reinforce what you're saying.
Like using your hands when explaining something.
Exactly. And emblems, gestures with specific meanings that can stand alone or reinforce words, like the OK sign.
Gotcha. There are regulators that manage conversation, nodding your head for someone to continue. Affect displays show emotion, like a frown. And adapters are those often unconscious movements that release tension, like tapping your pen or fidgeting.
Then we have paralanguage, all the vocal stuff, besides the words, your tone, volume, pitch, rhythm, and pauses. Proxemics is your use of space and distance, which sends signals about relationship and comfort level.
And chronemics is your perception and use of time. The sources give the classic contrast between cultures known for punctuality versus those where schedules are more flexible. Our relationship with time communicates a lot.
It really does. And artifacts are objects that communicate something about you, like decorative items in your workspace.
Interesting.
The sources also mention nonverbal cues that might be associated with deception, like reduced eye contact or awkward pauses, though these aren't foolproof indicators.
Right, you can't just assume. And they highlight the big role nonverbal communication plays in first impressions. Paying attention to things you can control, like eye contact, posture, and appearing present, helps you start building that positive relationship with your audience from the get-go.
Definitely. Moving on from how we deliver, the sources look at language itself, how it functions as both a powerful tool and, well, a potential obstacle.
Language operates by rules: syntactic, how words are structured; semantic, the meaning of words; denotative being the dictionary definition; and connotative being the personal or emotional associations;
Okay.
and contextual, how meaning changes with the situation.
Language shapes how we see reality. It's symbolic and it's abstract. Saying car is efficient, sure, but it loses all the specific details of the make, model, or condition unless you add more specific language.
True. It organizes and classifies the world for us, and the sources point out various pitfalls or obstacles language can create, things like overused cliches.
Jargon, that's specialized language of a profession you have to judge if your audience will understand it.
And slang, which is informal and often generation or group specific. Critically, the sources highlight that sexist and racist language is simply unacceptable and illegal in the workplace.
Absolutely non-negotiable.
They also mention euphemisms, substituting a milder word, which can sometimes sound disingenuous if the original meaning is obvious, and doublespeak, language that's deliberately ambiguous or evasive.
Building on that, the material addresses the crucial topic of combating bias, which requires significant self and social awareness.
Yeah, this is important. They define key terms like stereotypes, those oversimplified generalizations about groups, which can be positive or negative, but are always limiting. Prejudice is holding beliefs or feelings about a group before having actual experience with individuals in that group, a prejudgment. The Eye of the Storm documentary is used as a classic example of how easily prejudice can be formed and acted upon.
And discrimination is taking that prejudice and acting on it, treating people or groups differently based on those preconceived notions.
Right.
The sources also bring up more subtle forms, like microaggressions, those brief, everyday interactions that send denigrating messages.
Those little comments or actions.
Exactly. And microinvalidations, cues that exclude or negate the reality and experiences of certain groups.
This is tough stuff, and the sources offer practical suggestions for what to do if you experience or witness bias. They suggest you might talk privately with a friend, a team lead, or a manager to figure out the best approach.
Or you could report it to a superior if appropriate.
Yeah.
Or if you feel safe and comfortable, you might consider speaking privately with the person involved. You could share how their communication impacted you, ask how they could phrase things better in the future, and encourage them to offer an apology.
The key is choosing the approach that feels safest and most effective for the situation.
Definitely. That's really valuable advice for navigating these complex situations. Finally, this foundational section looks at why we bother communicating at all, connecting it to our fundamental interpersonal needs.
Right, the motivation behind it.
The sources bring in insights from psychology. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is one example, showing how communication helps us meet needs from basic physiological ones, like getting a job for food shelter, up to safety, belonging, forming groups, esteem, gaining influence, and ultimately self-actualization.
And Schutz's theory of needs focuses on inclusion, control, and affection needs that we seek to fulfill through communication, operating on a spectrum and varying depending on who we're with and where we are.
Both theories frame communication as essential to human existence and development, from an infant communicating needs by crying to an adult navigating complex social and professional landscapes.
So we communicate to find our place, connect with others, and exert influence.
Pretty much, yeah.
That gives us a powerful understanding of the why behind it all. Now let's take these basics and move into Unit 2, focusing specifically on oral communication. In practice, those situations where you're speaking directly to someone or a group.
Okay. This section starts with a really handy list of top 10 things to consider to make yourself heard. It boils down key practical tips.
Things like preparing and practicing what you want to say, actively listening to others, and checking to make sure they understand you.
Planning your structure is on the list, as is something simple but crucial. Taking a breath to stay cool, because emotions can really cloud your message. Letting your body talk using positive body language is vital.
Reading the room to gauge whether the context is formal or informal. Mind your manners, simple greetings and closings matter. And importantly, Being productive, organizing your thoughts, and planning your delivery is a key part of this.
Right. Public speaking is a common form of oral communication, and the sources address managing the anxiety many people feel.
Mm.
The stress response is normal, but preparation and getting familiar with your material definitely helps.
And you don't have to be perfect.
Not at all.
The sources frame public speaking as a place to apply your productivity skills, organizing your message, anticipating potential questions or counter-arguments from the audience.
I love the idea from Julia Wood mentioned here of seeing public speaking as an enlarged conversation.
Yeah.
All the same communication elements are still at play, just on a bigger scale. It helps make it feel less intimidating, I think.
That's a great way to think about it. And thinking about that scale brings us to the rhetorical situation, the specific circumstances surrounding your speech or communication event.
This has three main components. The context, the time, place, and occasion. Delivering a complex proposal right after lunch might not be ideal.
Probably not.
The audience, who are they? What do they know? What are their beliefs and biases? This requires that self and social awareness and your purpose. Why are you speaking? What do you want to achieve?
Understanding these elements is foundational to crafting an effective message. The sources detail different purposes and types of speeches.
The general purposes are things like informing, persuading, entertaining, or motivating.
Yeah.
But you also need a specific purpose, the concrete outcome you intend.
Like what, exactly?
For example, the general purpose is to inform. The specific purpose might be for the audience to understand the new safety protocol and know where to find the training video.
Got it. For informative speeches, they describe types like expository, defining or explaining something, interpretive, explaining the significance of something, like the historical importance of the railroad, descriptive, helping the audience visualize something, and demonstration, show and tell, like teaching someone to make salsa or felled a paper airplane. Think of it like a cooking show.
Right. On the persuasive side, functions include stimulate, generating interest, like getting a business audience to care about climate change, convince, getting agreement, perhaps using an example like an actor advocating for a cause, call to action, getting them to do something, like a sales pitch, increase consideration, getting them to think seriously about your position, like weighing the cost versus features of a product, and develop tolerance, getting them to understand and appreciate an alternate viewpoint, even if they don't agree, like comparing horsepower versus torque in engines.
That distinction on developing tolerance is important. It's not always about winning the argument, but fostering understanding.
Exactly. The sources revisit intercultural communication barriers here, highlighting how language can be a barrier. Yes, while specific language creates in-group identity, it can also exclude outsiders. This again requires self and social awareness to navigate. Cultural perceptions also create barriers, different expectations around roles, varying worldviews, how we interpret reality, and ethnocentrism, the belief that your own culture is superior.
Which can make it hard to understand practices in a new country, for example.
Definitely.
When preparing for any speech, the sources offer practical advice. Choosing your topic starts with knowing yourself and your audience, what interests you, your credibility, what your employer needs, your ability to deliver, and importantly, is it appropriate and appealing to the audience? Steer clear of offensive topics.
And you also need to match the topic to your purpose and, crucially, the scope and timing. Can you actually cover this topic well in the time you have?
Right, like the example of trying to discuss the entire history of flight in 5 minutes.
That's gonna happen.
It makes it clear you need to narrow your focus dramatically, perhaps to just the first successful flight, or like focusing on classic Mustangs instead of the whole history of the car.
Exactly. Making it relevant to your audience is key, like discussing classic Mustangs for auto mechanics. Preparation also involves planning your research, evaluating sources. Information literacy is vital here, like checking a company website for potential bias and thinking about ethics and credibility.
Citing your sources properly is fundamental to ethics and avoiding plagiarism, which in the workplace can cost you your job and damage your employer's reputation.
It really can. And honesty builds trust and actually reduces anxiety. And staying organized throughout the preparation process is a key productivity skill.
Absolutely. Once you have your material, you need to organize your speech. The sources lay out common patterns.
Patterns like time chronological, comparison, contrast, cause effect, and problem solution. The railroad example can be used with different patterns, contrasting old and new shipping times, or looking at the cause and effect of railroad expansion.
Okay, you can slice it different ways.
Exactly. A speech structure generally includes an introduction, grabbing attention, stating purpose, the body, the main content using your chosen pattern, and a conclusion, summarizing and providing closure.
And the goal is also a residual message, that one main idea you want the audience to remember.
Right. Transitions are crucial for guiding the audience smoothly from one point to the next, whether they're internal previews, summaries, or simple signposts like, "Next, let's consider."
And let's not forget visual aids. The sources emphasize their value for making presentations more engaging, boosting your credibility, helping guide the audience, simplifying complex information, reinforcing your message, and improving retention.
But the purpose of each visual aid must be clear. It should enhance your message, not distract. Types include handouts, displays, slides, video clips, keep them short, objects or props.
Helpful hints include keeping them simple, focusing on one idea per slide, making them legible, testing your technology beforehand. This is where the technology skill comes in.
So important.
And practicing with your aids.
For persuasive speaking specifically, the sources dive into ethics and fallacies. Ethics violations involve things like manipulation, playing on emotions, deception, lying or omitting truth, intentional bias, only presenting one side, bribery or coercion, using power to force agreement.
And fallacies are essentially flawed arguments, rhetorical tricks that sound convincing but lack logical support. The sources list several common ones. Ad hominem, attacking the person, not the argument.
Classic.
Appeal to authority, using an unqualified source. Appeal to emotion, using emotion to distract from facts. Red herring, bringing up irrelevant info. Hasty generalization, jumping to conclusions.
Okay.
Straw man, misrepresenting an opponent's view to easily knock it down. Non sequitur, conclusion doesn't follow premises. And post hoc ergo propter hoc, assuming that because B happened after A caused B.
Recognizing these helps you avoid using them yourself and identify weak arguments from others. Finally, back to nonverbal. The sources offer tips for improving nonverbal presentation when speaking publicly.
Observing others and getting feedback on your own nonverbals is key to improvement. They give concrete steps for using gestures effectively in public speaking. Anticipation, a slight hand movement preparing for the gesture.
Right.
Implementation, the gesture itself reinforcing your point. And relaxation, returning to a neutral position, signaling transition.
These steps help ensure your body language is intentional and supports your message, rather than distracting from it.
Okay, that gives us a solid handle on speaking. Now let's shift our focus to Unit 3, Written Communication Mastery. Just like with oral communication, the sources give us some quick, essential tips for writing.
Yeah, they offer a top 10 things to consider before you hit send, especially relevant for email. Things like having a clear objective, considering your audience, maintaining professionalism, and absolutely unequivocally proofreading.
Oh, yes. Planning your structure, being concise, one subject per email is a good rule, being prompt in responding, and minding your tone to maintain credibility are on the list.
And including a clear subject line, salutation, and signature. They also advise responding carefully to strong emotion expressed in an email. Don't let someone else's tone dictate yours.
Good advice.
These tips touch on productivity, technology, and self and social awareness.
The example of the unprofessional student email to a professor really drives home what happens when you ignore these basics: misspellings, lack of formality, missing information. It creates immediate barriers and undermines your message and credibility.
Definitely. The core of effective writing, according to the sources, is simply accomplishing its purpose. Like speaking, you have a general purpose, inform, persuade, etc., and a specific purpose, the concrete action or understanding you want the reader to have.
For common business writing, which is often informative, the sources suggest including predictable elements: who, what, where, how, and sometimes why.
The radon letter example illustrates this. General purpose: inform residents about radon. Specific purpose: residents understand the hazard, know where to get info, and attend a meeting. The sources point out that someone who is, say, a radon mitigation contractor might read that letter with a very different specific purpose in mind.
Ah, interesting perspective.
Which highlights the importance of self and social awareness when writing for an audience.
Indeed. The sources also discuss the factors that influence written communication. Credibility, which is how the audience perceives the integrity of your message based on your impartiality, expertise, or connection to a positive organization.
Timing when the message is sent. The audience, their needs, existing knowledge, and how they might react. And the channel you choose: email, a printed memo, a website, making sure it's the right one for your message to be seen, understood, and acted upon.
Just like speaking, written messages need organization. The elements are similar: purpose, main idea, supporting evidence, an organizational pattern, and transitions.
Written organizational patterns overlap with oral ones would have some unique applications. Time, comparison, contrast, example, process procedure, perfect for how-to guides, point pattern, and problem solution.
And written transitions are key to guiding the reader through your ideas smoothly, using internal previews, internal summaries, or signposts.
Style is a critical aspect of written communication, the way the text is crafted, through word choice, tone, and sentence structure to achieve its purpose. It's about the structural choices you make.
The sources describe three main styles and when to use them: internal versus external communication. Colloquial is very informal, conversational, sometimes called folksy.
Right.
It can work in specific marketing contexts, but risks sounding condescending.
Casual is more relaxed, common in internal emails, but still requires structure, a clear subject line, and professionalism. Formal is structured, uses precise language, and is typical for reports, proposals, or external communications on company letterhead.
So choosing the right style is all about context.
Definitely. The sources go into more detail on email communication, breaking down its standard components and providing detailed tips like avoiding abbreviations, keeping it brief, aim for 3 small paragraphs or less.
Good rule of thumb.
Using good formatting, line breaks, paragraphs, and always rereading and revising before sending. The construction interruptions email example shows these elements in action.
They also cover reports, defining them as documents used to record and convey information, often analytical or factual.
Types include lab reports, research reports, progress reports, and so on. While there's no single universal format, reports generally include components like a title, table of contents, summary, introduction, body, conclusion, and sometimes recommendations or references.
The report checklist provided in the sources is a great tool for ensuring your report meets its goals, considering the audience's needs, checking accuracy, readability, clarity, and making sure it represents your best effort.
Very useful. Resumes are covered as a specific, vital written document. They're defined as a summary of your education, skills, and work history for potential employers.
Basic components include contact info, education, and work experience, usually listed in reverse chronological order. This applies whether it's a printed document or an online profile.
The sources place strong emphasis on the revision process. This happens after you've written the first draft.
Not during.
Well, you might tweak as you go, but the real revision is a separate stage. You evaluate the content, organizations, style, and readability. Readability tools can be a part of this evaluation, but shouldn't be the only factor.
Okay. Strategies for revising style include things like breaking up overly long sentences, rewriting wordy phrases, deleting repetitive words, using synonyms helps, getting rid of outdated language or slang, checking cliches, choosing more precise words, and ensuring parallel construction.
The sources offer a simple, is it professional? Test for your writing. Are you proud of this work? Does it fulfill its mission and meet expectations?
A good gut check.
Yeah. Good business writing, they summarize, is professional, respectful, clear, and minimizes the chance of misunderstanding.
The final stages of polish involve formatting, spelling, punctuation, and grammar. Formatting covers how the document looks, margins, justification, typefaces. They mention the difference between serif and sans serif, and even have a did you know about the history of typeface creation.
Oh, interesting. Spelling is absolutely critical for credibility. Misspelling a name can be particularly damaging.
Definitely. Punctuation provides signals to the reader, just like pauses in speaking. Commas, semicolons, and apostrophes all serve specific functions to clarify meaning.
And grammar rules ensure your sentences are structured correctly. Subject-verb agreement, consistent verb tense, avoiding double negatives, which are incorrect in standard English, and using irregular verbs correctly.
They also mention common errors like misplaced modifiers, like the funny tree hitting the car example. Having a proofreading checklist is a good idea.
Essential. This unit wraps up by revisiting overcoming barriers in the context of writing. It emphasizes sweating the small stuff, because small details, like errors or poor formatting, can create barriers.
Referencing that unprofessional student email again.
Exactly. Getting the target meaning is crucial, which means avoiding bypassing when the sender and receiver misunderstand each other's meaning.
Right.
They also remind you to consider nonverbal aspects even in writing, like formatting and overall presentation, which communicate care and professionalism.
That's a great point.
And they stress the value of review, reflect, and revise. Reflection isn't procrastination. It's thinking about what's there and what's missing. Revision is actively changing the text to improve it, looking at it from the reader's point of view.
The sources connect this reflection process to the productivity skill, like pausing to consider how you used your time.
Yeah, like where has the time gone? Applying that to your writing process.
Okay, that's a comprehensive dive into written communication. Now, let's move to the final unit, Unit 4, which focuses on collaboration and workplace dynamics, how these communication principles play out when you're working with others.
Right. This starts by looking at groups and teams. A group is simply defined as at least three people who recognize themselves as a collective. Groups develop group norms, their own customs and standards.
Primary groups are those meeting inclusion and affection needs, while secondary groups meet control and achievement needs, like a sales department team.
Hmm.
The sources point out that work groups can often solve problems better than individuals because you get specialized skills and diverse perspectives working together.
That synergy effect. Larger groups often contain smaller group subdivisions, like demographic groups. Groups also tend to go through predictable stages of development.
There's forming, the initial uncertainty, then storming, where conflict often arises over leadership and roles.
The tricky phase.
Anticipating and helping resolve this is key, and clarifying the group's purpose helps navigate it.
After storming comes norming, where rules and roles get established. Then performing, where the focus is on actually getting the job done and group performance. Finally, adjourning, wrapping things up.
And having a clear agenda for meetings, for instance, can help move a group through the storming phase more smoothly.
Good point. Individuals within groups also take on different roles. Some are positive roles that help the group function, like initiators, information givers, evaluators.
Okay.
And some are negative roles that hinder progress, like blockers, which is different from respectfully disagreeing aggressors, or joke tellers who derail the discussion. Recognizing these roles in yourself and others is part of self and social awareness.
Conflict is a reality in any workplace where people interact. The sources define it as a struggle stemming from perceived opposing goals or needs.
They present two views: conflict as negative and something to avoid, versus conflict as an opportunity for clarification, growth, and strengthening relationships.
I like the opportunity view.
Me too.
Duh.
Key conflict management strategies from the sources include anticipating conflict, reducing emotion, take a break if you're on edge, reducing uncertainty, get the facts, face saving, helping others preserve their reputation, and empathy, actively listening to understand why someone feels the way they do, looking beyond just their words.
And crucial to empathy is active listening, truly listening without interrupting, choosing an appropriate time and place free from distractions, especially when discussing sensitive topics like evaluations.
Right. The sources stress focusing on factors you can control and always maintaining professionalism.
Which leads directly into professionalism in the workplace. It's about how you present yourself and interact with others.
Things like appropriate attire for your workplace shows respect. Your body language posture, making eye contact communicates confidence and engagement.
Volume and location are important. Having a sensitive business discussion loudly in an elevator is inappropriate.
Definitely not.
Maintaining standards in your written communication is also key. And simple punctuality shows respect for others' time.
They also touch on behavior at company events, treating them as extensions of the workplace, being mindful of alcohol if it's served, and practicing small talk and introductions.
Noting these points reflect typical U.S. corporate culture expectations.
Right, that's an important caveat. All this connects back to self and social awareness.
The sources discuss teamwork and collaboration, which is simply working together towards a shared goal. The basics involve having a clear goal, defined roles for team members, and understanding the team's dynamics.
Advantages include increased motivation, greater creativity, and better ability to overcome challenges. Challenges can include competing priorities, conformity, or groupthink.
Where people are afraid to speak up.
Exactly. Personality clashes and internal competition.
Understanding group dynamics, the interactions, processes, and identity of the team is part of self and social awareness. The Favorites Company, case study with Kevin, Mariah, and John, is a great illustration of how different team members with varied skills collaborate to tackle business challenges.
Like inventory or website updates.
Demonstrating the practical application of productivity skills within a team context.
The sources also touch on leadership styles. Leaders can be chosen, democratic, or emerge naturally from the group dynamic, emergent.
Types of leaders described include autocratic, dictatorial, laissez-faire, hands-off, and others like leader as technician, leader as conductor, and leader as coach.
And the sources note that the best style often depends on the situation. Understanding these styles helps you navigate workplace hierarchies and contributes to your self and social awareness.
A very common workplace dynamic is meetings. The sources emphasize the importance of preparation, defining the purpose clearly, creating an agenda, and asking for input.
Crucial.
Figuring out who should participate, scheduling effectively, using tools like Outlook can help here, and even contacting attendees beforehand to encourage participation. A good agenda helps minimize that storming phase we mentioned.
Right. During the meeting, start with introductions if needed. State the purpose clearly, stick to the agenda, manage time, summarize decisions, and assign tasks.
Finally, the sources highlight the essential role of technology in the workplace, linking it directly to productivity and technology skills.
This includes audio-only communication like phone calls. They even mention voice coaches for phone presence. And PA systems. Cell phones offer flexibility but have drawbacks like dropped calls.
Uh-huh.
VoIP systems, voice over internet protocol, like Vonage or Ring Central, offer advanced features but can have bandwidth or security issues.
Conference phones are designed for multiple people in a room with varying capabilities. Video conferencing via platforms like WebEx or Zoom allows face-to-face interaction remotely, but requires testing your tech beforehand.
Always test the tech. Screen sharing or web sharing,
Mhm.
Google Hangouts GoToMeeting, is crucial for collaborating on documents or presenting visuals.
Yeah, very common now.
And multi-feature online platforms like Slack or Amazon Chime consolidate various communication tools, voice, video, chat, file sharing, scheduling, creating a kind of virtual office, all aimed at boosting productivity.
Speaking of productivity, the sources wrap up this section by emphasizing time management. It's fundamental for effectiveness and efficiency.
Strategies include tracking where your time actually goes,
Check.
an activity log, prioritizing tasks ruthlessly, using a daily system like a to-do list or planner,
Okay.
chunking related tasks together, learning to delegate when possible, learning to say no to distractions or non-essential requests, and actively avoiding procrastination.
Easier said than done sometimes.
Tell me about it. Technology tools, like using Outlook for scheduling or task lists, are key enablers of good time management. It's about being intentional with your most valuable resource time.
Applying these strategies, sometimes even slowing down to manage your time effectively, can lead to better outcomes and fewer errors, which ultimately boosts your overall productivity.
Makes sense.
So we've truly covered a vast landscape in this deep dive, starting from the fundamental building blocks of how communication works, moving through mastering interactions when speaking and writing,
Yeah, a lot of ground.
and finally looking at how these principles apply when you're collaborating in teams and navigating the dynamics of the workplace. It's clear that these aren't just soft skills. They're essential for solving problems, connecting effectively, and genuinely thriving at work.
That's right. Everything from your body language in a meeting and the tone of your email to how you manage conflict and choose your words plays a critical role in your success and your ability to build relationships.
Mm-hmm.
This material offers concrete insights and practical strategies, all grounded in understanding yourself and the people you interact with.
And the fascinating takeaway, I think, is how interconnected all these pieces are. Improving your ability in one area, maybe your listening skills, or how you structure your thoughts before speaking can have a ripple effect, making you a more confident and effective communicator across the board.
This really prompts an important question for you, the listener.
Mm-hmm.
Considering that effective communication is so central to achieving our goals and building connections, not just in our careers, but in all aspects of life,
Yeah.
how might intentionally focusing on and applying just one of the principles we've discussed today change the very next important interaction you have?
Something powerful to think about as you go about your day. We hope this deep dive has given you some valuable tools and a fresh perspective for your own communication journey.